The room went quiet the moment he walked in. Not the respectful kind of quiet. The kind that happens when a predator enters a space and every living thing in it decides to stop moving. His name was Victor Kesler, and he had never lost. Not once, not in competition, not in sparring, not even in the backroom demonstrations that happened after official tournaments. The ones where the rulebook stayed in someone's bag and real fighters found out what they were actually made of. 1973. Los Angeles. A private dojo tucked into a commercial strip in Culver City, sandwiched between a dry cleaner and a hardware store. From the outside, it looked like nothing: a frosted glass door, a hand-painted sign that just said Kesler Academy of Martial Arts, no flashy logo, no neon. Victor didn't need marketing. He had reputation. Inside, the air smelled like floor wax, sweat, and old leather. Strip lighting ran the length of the ceiling. The mats were dark blue, slightly worn at the center from years of footwork, of throws, of people hitting the ground. On the back wall, framed certificates lined up in a row like soldiers, 7 of them. 6 different disciplines, one man's name on every single one. Victor Kesler. 6th-degree black belt in Shotokan karate. National champion 3 years running. Former military hand-to-hand combat instructor. The man who had broken a stack of 12 concrete blocks at a demonstration in San Diego and then asked, in front of 400 people, if anyone wanted him to try 13. Nobody answered. He was 34 years old. 6'2", 210 pounds. Forearms like bridge cables. Eyes that didn't blink enough. The kind of man who had spent so long being the most dangerous person in every room that he'd stopped thinking of it as something he'd earned. It had become, in his mind, simply what he was. That was the problem, not the skill. The skill was real. The victories were real. The years of training, the broken knuckles, the early mornings, the sacrifice, all of it was real. But somewhere along the way, the skill had stopped being enough. He'd started needing something more. He needed the room to know, needed every person who walked through that frosted glass door to feel it immediately. He needed to be feared before he was respected. This particular Saturday afternoon, the dojo held about 30 people. Students in white gi, ranging from teenagers to men in their 40s. Some were his regular students. Some were visiting from other schools, there to observe, to train, to learn from the best in the city. That was the reputation. Kesler's Dojo. You want to know what real martial arts looks like. That's where you go. Victor stood at the front of the room, demonstrating a combination. Jab, reverse punch, sweep, hammer fist. He moved through it slowly at first, almost lazy, the way a man moves when he knows the motion so deeply it lives in his spine and not his brain. Then he sped it up. 1 full second, the whole combination, precise and devastating. The students watched. Some took notes. Nobody said anything because nobody wanted to be the one who said the wrong thing. That was the atmosphere Victor had built. Respect, yes. But underneath it, something more uncomfortable. Deference born from low-level fear. The kind of environment where a student would rather make a mistake and say nothing than ask a question and face the response. You. He pointed at one of the visiting students, a young man from a Tangso-do school in Pasadena. Come up. Show me your front kick. The young man came forward. He threw the kick. It was clean, technically sound. A good kick. Victor looked at it the way a surgeon looks at amateur stitching. Weak, he said. Loud enough for everyone. No hip rotation. No commitment. You're kicking to show me the kick. In a real situation, that kick gets you killed. Come back when you understand the difference between movement and intention. The young man went back to his place, face red, eyes down. Nobody laughed. Nobody was allowed to laugh at someone else. But nobody defended him either. That wasn't how it worked here. This was the room. This was the culture. Victor at the center. Gravity pulling everything toward him, and everyone else orbiting at a careful distance. That's when the front door opened. Most people who walked in for the first time hesitated at the door. They'd look around, take a moment to absorb the room, the certificates, the students. Victor, they'd feel the weight of the place and adjust accordingly. This man didn't hesitate. He stepped through the door and moved to the side, just out of the way of foot traffic, and stood quietly. He was small, not short exactly, but compact in a way that made him seem almost absent. Maybe 5'7", maybe 140 pounds. He was wearing dark, simple clothes. Not a gi, not training gear, just clothes, dark trousers and a plain shirt. He had a kind of stillness about him that was different from shyness. It wasn't withdrawal. It was the opposite, actually. Presence so concentrated it took up no space at all. He looked around the dojo with calm, direct eyes. Nobody paid him much attention. Visitors came sometimes, people who'd heard about the school and wanted to see what the training looked like. This one looked like maybe he'd wandered in from a film set somewhere. He had that quality about him, something that didn't quite fit the context of the room. Victor noticed him. That was enough to stop the lesson. "You looking for something?" Victor asked, across the room. Voice that made the question feel like a test. The man looked at him. Calm. Direct. No shift in posture. "Just wanted to watch for a while, if that's all right." The voice was quiet, accented, something Chinese underneath the English. Victor let the silence stretch a beat longer than it needed to. Then he shrugged. "You can stand there." He turned back to his students, demonstration over, back to business. The lesson continued for another 20 minutes. Victor moved through the curriculum the way he always did. Controlled, methodical, occasionally stopping to correct someone with a comment that landed just a little harder than necessary. The students absorbed it. That was the agreement. Unspoken, but understood. You came to Kesler's dojo. You accepted Kesler's way. The small man near the door watched everything. He didn't shift his weight, didn't check his watch, didn't look bored or impressed or uncomfortable. He just watched with those calm, direct eyes, the way someone watches a river. Not analyzing it, not judging it, just seeing it clearly. Victor noticed this. He noticed it the way a man notices something he can't immediately categorize. And Victor Kesler did not enjoy things he couldn't categorize. After a water break, Victor walked toward the back of the room and stopped near where the stranger was standing. He looked him over slowly, the kind of look designed to make a person feel measured and found insufficient. "You train somewhere?" Victor asked. "Yes." "Where?" "Different places. I studied Wing Chun for a while. Now I teach my own approach." Victor's expression shifted, just slightly. The corner of his mouth moved in a direction that wasn't quite a smile. "Wing Chun." He said the words like he was reading a menu item he had no intention of ordering. "That's the one with the wooden dummy, right? The little punches." He made a loose, dismissive gesture with his fingers, fast, fluttering motion, a pantomime of something delicate. A few students laughed, not all of them, but enough. The man near the door didn't react, didn't tighten, didn't flush. His expression stayed exactly where it was. "The wooden dummy trains sensitivity," he said. "Structure. It's not about power." "Right," Victor said. "That's the problem, isn't it? Real fighting is about power." He turned back to the room, including his students in the conversation the way a professor includes a lecture hall. Wing Chun is a concept, a theory, looks interesting on paper, maybe in a demonstration with cooperative partners. But in a real fight? He shook his head. Theory doesn't survive contact. More laughs. Comfortable laughs. The kind you make when the authority in the room has given you permission. One of the senior students, a broad man in his late 20s named Davis, leaned toward the guy next to him and whispered something. They both looked at the stranger, looked at his plain clothes. his slight frame, his stillness. Whatever Davis said, the other man grinned. The stranger didn't look at them. Victor continued, "What's your name?" "Bruce." "Bruce." Victor nodded slowly. "And this approach you teach, what do you call it?" "Jeet Kune Do." Silence. Nobody recognized it. Of course they didn't. In 1973, among traditional martial arts schools in Los Angeles, the name meant very little outside of a specific circle. It wasn't a famous system yet. It wasn't a brand yet. It was just something a man had built in his own living room and garage, and mined over many years of thinking very hard about what fighting actually was. "Jeet Kune Do," Victor repeated, slowly, like he was sounding out something amusing. "Never heard of it. Most people haven't. And you teach this?" "Yes. People pay you for that." The stranger, Bruce, looked at Victor without any aggression, without any defensiveness, with something much harder to respond to, which was simple, unworried clarity. "They do," he said. Victor smiled now. A real smile this time, the kind that means the conversation has arrived somewhere enjoyable. "Okay," he said. He turned back to his students. "You hear that? Jeet Kune Do, something new every day." He gestured at Bruce with a loose, open hand. The gesture of a man indicating an exhibit. "Small guy, unknown style, teaches people things." He paused. "In my experience, the ones who invent their own systems are the ones who couldn't master anyone else's." The room responded. Laughter, fuller this time. Even a few of the more reserved students. The permission had been extended, and they took it. Davis, the senior student, spoke up from across the room. "Hey, if it works so well, why don't you show us?" He grinned, put the theory to the test. A few voices agreed. Not pushy, more like encouragement toward entertainment. Bruce looked at Davis, then back at Victor. Victor spread his hands in a gesture of gracious invitation. "My mat is open. Always open. That's how we learn here. Real contact, real pressure." He paused just long enough, unless the theory doesn't hold up under those conditions. There it was, the real invitation. Wrapped in courtesy, but everyone in the room understood what it was. Bruce was quiet for a moment, looking at Victor the way he'd looked at everything since he walked through the door. Without hurry. Without agitation. "All right," he said. The room shifted. Students moved. Space cleared toward the center of the mat. The energy changed in the way it always changes when something real is about to happen, when the sparring isn't scheduled and the mats aren't arranged and nobody announced anything. It just suddenly became real. Victor rolled his neck slowly. One side, then the other. Two audible pops. He moved to the center of the mat with the ease of a man returning to somewhere he belonged. He was wearing his gi, his black belt tied with the practiced tightness of thousands of repetitions. He looked exactly like what he was, a physically dominant, technically accomplished fighter standing in his own dojo, surrounded by his own students. Bruce walked to the center in his dark slacks and plain shirt. The contrast was almost comedic. Almost. Davis was grinning openly now, arms crossed, already composing the story he was going to tell later. Some of the younger students looked genuinely concerned, not for Victor, but for the stranger who was about to find out, as people occasionally needed to find out, what Victor Kesler was actually made of. The two men faced each other. Victor settled into his stance, classical Shotokan, deep, wide, grounded, front hand high, rear hand chambered. The stance of a man who had won 3 national championships from exactly this position. He looked at Bruce over the top of his front fist. Bruce stood upright, relaxed, weight balanced, hands loose at his sides, not raised, not defensive, not aggressive, like someone waiting for a bus. Victor's eyes moved over him with professional assessment, looking for a guard, looking for a stance he recognized, finding nothing that fit a category. That bothered him more than he let on. "Ready?" Victor asked. Bruce nodded. Victor moved. He came fast, not testing, not probing. Victor Kesler did not probe. He attacked the way he always attacked, with the full weight of his reputation behind every movement. Reverse punch, lead leg snap kick, combination that had ended sparring sessions and competition matches and backroom challenges across 6 years of dominance. It covered the distance in under a second. Bruce wasn't there. Not dodged backward. Not jumped sideways. He moved maybe 4 inches to the left. Just 4 inches. The punch passed his face close enough to disturb the air near his ear. The kick found nothing. Victor's momentum carried him slightly forward, just a fraction, just enough. In that fraction, Bruce's hand rose. It didn't strike, it touched. 2 fingers, light as paper, against the side of Victor's jaw. A gesture almost. A question asked in the language of combat. Then Bruce stepped back to where he'd been standing. The whole thing took less than 3 seconds. The room didn't react immediately. The brain needs a moment when it sees something it has no framework for. Students looked at each other. Davis uncrossed his arms. Victor reset his stance, but something had changed in his face, something small and significant. He attacked again, faster this time, more committed, a combination that moved through 3 techniques without pause, the kind of sequence that required years to build and had never failed to land on something. It landed on nothing. Bruce moved through it the way water moves through fingers. Present, then gone, then present again. His footwork made no sound. There was no dramatic evasion, no acrobatic escape, just absence, perfectly timed, perfectly placed. And then, at the end of Victor's combination, when the force was spent and the body was momentarily open, Bruce stepped in. 1 strike. Precise. Stopped 1 inch from Victor's throat. Held there. Still. The room was absolutely silent. Victor looked down at the hand in front of his throat. At the fingers that hadn't touched him. At the strike that had chosen, deliberately, not to finish. He looked up at Bruce. Bruce lowered his hand. Stepped back. Said nothing. Victor stood straight. The silence stretched across the whole room, across every student, across Davis, who was no longer grinning, the silence of people who just watched something they could not explain and could not dismiss. Victor looked at the mat for a long moment. Then he looked at Bruce. Really looked, the way he hadn't bothered to look when the small man in plain clothes walked through his door. "How did you do that?" Victor said. Not a question. A statement arriving late. "I stopped trying to win," Bruce said. "When you stop trying to win, you start seeing clearly." Victor said nothing. Bruce picked up his jacket from beside the door. He paused with his hand on the frosted glass. "Your students are good," he said. "They work hard. You've built something real here." A pause. "Give them room to question. That's where the real training starts." He walked out. The door closed quietly behind him. Nobody spoke for a long time. Victor stood in the center of his mat, in his dojo, surrounded by his students and his certificates and his 6 years of unbroken dominance. He stood there and thought about 4 inches, about a hand that stopped 1 inch short, about what it meant that the most dangerous moment he'd faced in years had come from a man in street clothes who never raised his voice. Davis finally spoke, quiet for once. Who was that? One of the younger students near the door had seen the man outside for just a moment through the frosted glass before he disappeared into the Culver City afternoon. "I think," the student said slowly, "that was Bruce Lee." The name landed differently now than it would have an hour ago. Victor walked to the back of the room. He sat down on the bench beneath his certificates. The 6 disciplines, the 7 frames, the 3 national titles. He sat there for a while, alone with something he hadn't felt in a very long time, the beginning of humility. That's what Bruce Lee left behind in every room he walked through. Not a broken jaw, not a damaged reputation, not a lesson in who was stronger or faster or more decorated. He left behind a question. What are you training for? Not the sport, not the certificate. not the fear in someone else's eyes when you walk through the door. What is it actually for? What does it mean to understand fighting so completely that you no longer need to prove it? What does it mean to be capable of ending something and choose, instead, to let it live? Victor didn't have the answer that afternoon, but for the first time in 6 years, he was asking the question. And that, Bruce Lee would have told you, is where real martial arts begins. Not on the mat, not in the competition, not in the moment of impact. It begins the moment you realize that the person you've been fighting the hardest, the one you've been trying to dominate and silence and prove yourself against, was never standing across from you on the mat. It was always the mirror. Culver City, 1973. A dojo full of students. One arrogant champion. One quiet man in plain clothes. 3 seconds. Infinite lessons.